I conjured this idea for the conference more than a year ago, and it came on the heels of in the far distance. We had done a computers and negotiation thing 26 years ago now, and it felt that enough had changed between then and now to do this again. I don't know what there is about me that draws me to the tech issues. I don't have any computer science background. I'm not as versed in it as Joel is, for example. But it's been a longstanding interest of me. And I've done a lot in the teaching area. I've got a 8-week, 35-hour negotiation course through Harvard Business School that's been seen by students, taken by students in more than 120 countries. I've done something for LinkedIn Learning. I've got a negotiation self-assessment best practice app. I've created exercises for Harvard Business School publishing. But I'm not on this panel because I don't like to listen to myself. I like to listen to other people, but I'm more than an interested party. I've learned a lot from a number of people who are popping up here, and I'm looking forward to learning from more. But Chris and Jeanne are with us. Muli also on the panel, and Carrie Straub is going to make an appearance. Suggest we get started, and I'll just sit up in the rafters and watch the chat. So welcome everybody. Chris, Jeanne, can we get started?
Yes, I'm happy to get started. I'll be moderating the panel for today. I want to remind all of you to mute if you're not talking, to keep the background noise down. I teach in the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and this is the panel on technologies that enhance students' learning of negotiation. So the other panelists that will be fitting into a very crowded 90 minutes are Jeanne Brett from Northwestern University, Emmanuel Johnson from USC, Kristjan Korjus from Pactum Incorporated, Samuel Dinnar, Muli as he calls himself, from MIT, and Carrie Straub from Immersion Incorporated. And they'll each provide more extensive introductions when they speak, and of course you also have our bios. We're going to have 3 25-minute segments. Carrie and I are going to talk about learning interpersonal skills through digital puppeteering. Muli is going to talk about apps for organizational learning. And then Jeanne, Emmanuel, and Kristjan are going to talk about AI-based learning and negotiation. Because it's a crowded schedule, I'm going to be a tough timekeeper on the 25-minute slots. I'll give a 5-minute warning and a 1-minute warning. And that way we'll have 15 minutes at the end for group discussion, and Mike can be the sort of MC for that part of it, identifying themes from out of the chat. And I hope you'll be very active in the chart because it's an archival resource for all of us. And then at least some of the panelists will hang around afterwards, because our goal isn't really to cover this topic. That's not possible in 90 minutes. Our goal is to encourage you to stay interested in it. We want to throw some gasoline on the fire of your curiosity and see if we can get you into the water with us. So with that as background, I'm going to start my 25-minute timer for our part of the session. So Carrie and I are going to be discussing learning interpersonal skills for negotiation. And I'm going to frame a question, because if you start with a technology, you have a solution looking for a problem, which is never a good thing. So we'll start with a problem in negotiation teaching. And then Carrie is going to discuss and demonstrate the immersion system as an exemplar of one approach to this. Mike will give some brief testimony about using this with himself and his students. I'll discuss evaluation and assessment briefly, although I won't be able to go into much detail within the time constraints. And then I'm going to frame some issues in scaling up the usage of these kinds of systems. And Carrie and I will describe some future evolution that we expect for this kind of technology over the next few years. So that's the menu. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on the importance of interpersonal skills because that's been a big theme throughout the workshop, certainly in the keynotes. We know that there's multiple dimensions of nonverbal that are important for negotiation, and that those are both part of the interaction between individuals, but also, as we saw in the immersion demo last night, there's interpersonal interaction between teams of people who are negotiating with each other. There's multiple dimensions of verbal interaction beyond the semantics. So there's tone and pitch, prosody and volume. And so not just in negotiation, but really in all aspects of social life, we're noting the kinds of social signals that were described, we're interpreting what we think they mean, and then we're emoting in order to achieve the goals that we have in the social situation. And that noting, interpreting, and emoting is complex in negotiating situations, as you know. Part of the challenge in teaching is that students enter with different levels of skills. They're based in part on biological factors. So Asperger's would be an example of somebody that comes in with a biological handicap in terms of reading social signals. They're exacerbated by cultural factors if you're operating outside of your own culture, and so it's harder to interpret what the meaning is of the signals. And some people come in with more experience than others. It's also true that an intellectual understanding of interpersonal skills does not guarantee that you can be effective. It's a little like pool playing. If you know Newton's 3 laws, you completely understand intellectually what's involved in playing pool. That doesn't mean that you can shoot the balls into the pockets. That's a different kind of skill, and it's the skill that we need to try to build beyond the intellectual understanding. In particular, all of us have specific weaknesses. Maybe it's saying no. Maybe it's dealing with the microaggressions that were discussed earlier in the workshop. Maybe it's implicit biases that we carry with us. Perhaps we have one kind of identity that we use in our professional life that isn't well suited for negotiation, and so we have to unlearn that identity when we come to the negotiation table. So a focus in particular on weaknesses makes a lot of sense, because that's the part that really requires the most attention. But of course, even the most skilled person can get better, even if you don't have a major identifiable weakness. So the technology that we're going to approach for learning this complex suite of interpersonal skills is a simulator that has an emphasis on 2 things. One of them is authenticity, which means that people have to do the negotiating rather than machines, because at least at this point in human history, and probably for at least a decade, we're not going to have machines that can really simulate what people can do. And authenticity is really important because you get mistraining and you get failure to transfer if you learn how to negotiate effectively with a system that isn't really like what the real world is. And also, authenticity is complicated because if you're doing flight simulation, which is analogous in the sense that pilots are looking at weaknesses that they might have. What do you do if the engine falls off? What do you do if the plane's radar shuts down? That's purely physical. You can build a purely physical computational system that can run a flight simulator, but you can't at this point with a negotiation simulator. But beyond authenticity, there's another dimension that's less discussed, but I think equally important, and that's polymorphism. So if you like the X-Men and you enjoy movies about mutants, you may know about Mystique, who is a metamorph who can assume the body shape and voice and so on of any person. And a polymorphic system is really valuable in learning interpersonal skills because It enables you to look at your weaknesses in minute detail. Do you have a weakness that relates to different negotiating styles with different genders, or with other kinds of observable physical factors? So a puppeteering system is particularly valuable because the puppets are polymorphic. They can assume any shape. It's like the Wizard of Oz in the sense that there's a human being behind the curtain, but it's not like the Wizard of Oz because the wizard can assume almost any form. And it's not just assuming the form of a person. Jeremy Bailenson at Stanford is an expert in what's called transformed social interaction, where you can do things in the digital world socially that are not possible in the real world. And those can be used for powerful forms of interpersonal learning. His book, Experience on Demand, is a terrific resource in that. One other thing that I would say about this type of simulator is that it's really good for research, because it allows us to control the variables in a negotiation situation much more rigorously than would be possible otherwise in an authentic system, as opposed to a machine-based system. And later I'll describe some work that Dr. Julian Radu and I are doing with implicit biases that uses this advantage, this research advantage. So we've asked Carrie to describe immersion as an example of a system of this type, a digital puppeteering system. And Carrie, I'm going to turn it over to you now to describe the system and show a demo of how this was used in Mike's teaching.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Good, good. I have some slides, but I can go without slides. Chris, I didn't know if we were pulling those up or not. I know we're pretty short on time. We have, what our system does is, and when we talked a little bit about this yesterday in the demo that we did last evening. Immersion is one of the few systems, and I think that's what we're talking about today. It's one of the few systems that is avatar driven versus agent driven. So, or I don't know if I'm saying driven correctly, but it uses avatars as these digital characters that can be driven by human beings versus agents that are driven by software. So Immersion's technology is specific to using humans to practice human capabilities, of which negotiation is very dependent on somebody's interpersonal skills in some ways, in many ways. So our company is one of the few ones that really focuses on that domain of interpersonal interaction. And that's why we have a system that allows a live person, we call them a simulation specialist, to inhabit an avatar. So I want to show you just a quick slide of it, just so that you can get an idea of the makeup. So here is, I'll go through this one really quickly. This is research that was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation using this technology, where we were basically compressing an activity. We were looking at classroom questioning. We were compressing that into 10-minute sessions, and the learners did 4 10-minute sessions of questioning, and then we compared them to colleagues that also got that same dosage of questioning, and 40 minutes, but they were doing it in an online interactive webinar, much like this one, with a content expert. What we found is that the people in the simulator, you're seeing this data here, they significantly improved their performance in terms of asking higher order questions over time. But when we followed them out into their classrooms and looked at how it impacted their change in performance, we found that they significantly outperformed their colleagues who'd had similar dosage, that 40-minute session. So we're looking at the applied practice of human skills, and in this case, it was higher order questioning. We're in about 80 or so universities now, mostly preparing teachers, but for a lot of different interpersonal skills. And I think this is what Chris was most interested in us exploring prior to showing you a quick snippet of how the technology works. So here is a graphic that shows Immersion's system, and on the left you'll see a simulation specialist, and that's that live operator that I was telling you about. And she's leveraging Immersion software to basically, it's an algorithmic assistance. So the AI is not replacing the human, it's augmenting the human. And we can kind of think of it like human amplified here. The artificial intelligence is pulling in some data from the simulation specialist. There's a controller that's moving the avatar's movements. They're tracking her lip movement, they're morphing her voice and changing it into different characters. And then it's also tracking her head movement. So as it takes all of that data into the system, we can collect information about that data. And that's what we're going to be talking about afterwards when we talk about future potential work that we can do with that type of data we can collect. And but essentially, it's giving an output that allows the wizard, as Chris said, to digitally puppeteer up to 3 adult avatars at the same time. So the scenario that we did last night had 2 avatars, and it was a job negotiation scenario, and you're going to see an example of that here from a video clip. But it allows one person to effectively become 2 people at the same time. And the research indicates, and it's actually some of the work that Jeremy Bailenson done that Chris Dede was referring to, the research indicates that people, when they communicate via avatars that are operated by live humans in the background, they communicate significantly more verbal and nonverbal behavior than they do when compared to speaking by telephone or on a video conference. So there's something about these digital characters that allow people to suspend belief and kind of buy into the situation a little bit more. And that's what our technology, we're creating a safe space for people to go in and practice. And to Chris's point, have kind of a lab-like setting. So I want to stop here. Is this an appropriate time, Chris, for me to share the video?
Yeah, but let me,
Yes.
This is Mike Wheeler here. One other thing I would add to your description, Carrie, is that whether it's potentially teaching negotiation or how you run a kindergarten class with kids bouncing off the wall, your focus, correct me if I'm wrong, is on very specific moments, particular issues and challenges. And as a consequence, they're given an objective, whether the objective is get the child to calm down, or in this case, get an increase in your compensation. And there are learning objectives along the way. So the person running the avatar knows the script and knows what, if you will, the attitude of the 5-year-old is, or the person who may or may not give you a task. So this is framed into give you compensation. This is framed towards very specific tasks with specific learning goals, correct?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So that's that. You'll describe the scenario here, but I just wanted to be sure that we were square on that.
Well, and Michael, we could talk, when we talk about this scenario, we did talk about the avatar's profiles kind of in the background. So that might be, do you want to set up the scenario so the group knows how they might be interested to hear from you?
I'm a little worried about time, so.
Okay.
Yeah, so good going.
Roll into it. Okay. So I'm going to share screen. Just bear with me 1 second and load this up. So this is Baruch. We have his permission to share this video. And this scenario is Baruch, his second attempt asking for a significant increase in salary in a time of really challenging financial times. So we're going to put it in here, and then we're going to quickly just show a 2-minute segment and then quickly forward to the debrief. And Chris, at any time, if you say, Carrie, put the cane around my neck and pull me off, I'm happy to stop. So I'm going to hit play and then share screen. And let me just make sure. I'm sorry.
You're sharing the screen.
Yep. I want to make sure I click the audio because I was talking at the same time, and that is never a good thing. Sorry, guys.
You know, they speak so highly of you, and I know that you are really helping with morale on your end. And again, that's much appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you. And look, I mean, the reason why I scheduled this meeting during such a busy time is because I had a really unexpected opportunity that came my way, and I just wanted to see if you could help me reason through it. So, you know, Acme Corporation, you know, our #1 competitor, they just approached me a few days ago. This was last week. And they said, we've heard about what you're doing, and we want to double whatever you're making in your current role for you to start giving us double effective next month. So this just came to me. I haven't even responded. This came to me through a headhunter, and this came to me completely unexpectedly. I've loved working here. I love working with my team. I just can't ignore a number like that, right? I mean, that's a life-changing number. You know how much I'm making now. To make double would change my family's life, would change, you know, my stability in every way. And you're the first people I'm telling about this. I wanted to come straight to you the minute I heard from them, just to see if you could help me reason through how to process this, because my number one priority is staying here with this company and continuing to succeed together.
Well, I'm not surprised that you got that offer, and we can't possibly match anywhere near that. So I guess congratulations might be in order, although I just can't believe we're having this conversation.
Well, I mean, congratulations. I appreciate that, obviously, but let me tell you something. When I'm weighing an opportunity professionally, there are two things in play. One is the money and the benefits, right? You can't ignore that. It is a...
So I'm going to forward to the debrief quickly. We'll just do a portion of this for time's sake.
Great. Wonderful. So in the meeting that you had, your take two with Max and Grant, what's something you did that you thought went well?
Well, it felt a lot better emotionally. I think what I tried to do, and it seemed like it was successful, I tried to bring us all together on the same team. So it was less an us versus them. It was more, let's all work together to come to a mutually beneficial conclusion.
Yes, you did a really, the way that you established.
So I'm going to stop there, make sure everybody got a little flavor. Is that good, Michael?
Yep.
So Mike, do you want to just give some quick comments on using this as a person teaching negotiation? And then I'm going to grab back so that Carrie and I have time to talk about where this is going.
So I've negotiated with Max and Grant myself. At first I found the experience weird because they are avatars. One, I was surprised at how quickly I got engaged in it. I sort of suspended disbelief, if you will. Second, my students, and there were a half dozen probably who did this, consistently said that this was more realistic than dealing with their classmates. And that's because when they're negotiating with somebody who sits next to them or they know from other classes, live in the same dorm, that's that person. It's not the identity that we've imposed on them as a seller or a buyer, as a nice guy or as somebody who's not. And so they felt they were more themselves as they did it. In retrospect, Baruch, who is not a shrinking violet, as you probably saw, was surprised that he was so provocative in that by claiming to have an offer that's twice as good as what he's getting. And I don't think he's going to have a personality change, but it was a really sobering experience for him in a way that I think was more effective than anything we could count on a student to do. Now, I'm looking at colleagues who, at the Harvard Law School, use the interpersonal skills exercise where every student in a trio identifies something that's really challenging in negotiation. There's an antagonist who provokes them and they respond as best they can. I'm sure that's good. I'm very interested in how real this artificial thing is. And I love the way, Carrie, you can script it in such a way that if there's a particular thing you're trying to teach, a micro moment in negotiations, somebody threatens you or whatever the case may be, you have some practice that's in a safe space to play with it. So I'll be curious what other people say, and I'm mindful, Chris, that you're watching the clock.
Yes, I think I'm going to jump back and leave for discussion some further exploration of this. So let me talk just a bit about measurement and evaluation. In the keynotes, you saw that many prominent researchers are looking at face-to-face interactions, doing detailed research studies of these, that it's actually easier if you're doing this in a digital environment because there's more things that you can measure. Dr. Julian Radu is a colleague of mine at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, He and I did some work on implicit bias, where we used immersion to create students who were performing identically in terms of their gains in early literacy. And we asked people with teaching experience to evaluate them. And we had the students provide some information on socioeconomic status for some of the students, but not all of the students. And we were, even with a relatively small sample, able to detect a pretty substantial implicit bias effect. So now we have to think about how we might use a similar system to try to overcome the implicit bias. But the point is that this kind of research can be done. And it's an example of something that was discussed in the keynotes, which is multimodal learning analytics, that you have multiple channels of streaming data, and you're synthesizing across those channels in order to draw insights. And while that's complicated, the more channels there are, the more you're triangulating on what likely the true situation is. Julian works with my colleague, Professor Bertrand Schneider, who does work in augmented reality and in maker spaces, and again is looking at human interaction. So there are resources at Harvard and distinguished people across the country who are working on measurement and evaluation. And you saw, in terms of more conventional evaluation, Carrie presenting the results from the Gates study. So I want to talk about practicality and scale and ask Carrie very quickly to respond to that. There's a couple kinds of issues with scale. One of them is scripting, that a careful script needs to be written by a negotiation specialist. That could actually be done by a community. So whether it's immersion or some other form of avatar-based system, the community of people teaching negotiation could develop some scripts and share those scripts among themselves. And people who specialize in a particular kind of negotiation might develop that script. And that would be very interesting. That would be a way, a kind of a community resource. But there's also the sim specialist, and the sim specialist is trained in a variety of ways that can be quite complex in terms of controlling the interface, that it's not very easy to play 3 different people, even with the help of AI and so on. And yet, if this is going to scale, we really need to get it to the point that instead of a trained actor, it might be your teaching fellow who's on the other end of this, or it might be a student who was in the course beforehand and did pretty well, or it might be the person we used was a master's student who had some experience with high school drama and found that he really liked doing immersion stuff. So Carrie, if that's where we are today, where might we be in 2 to 3 years with systems of this type and with the AI advances that we could expect?
So, so today we use a controller, combination of controller, head tracking, lip syncing. The controller is really what is the barrier right now. It's like when you see kids play video games and they get better and better and better, and they get that fluidity over time. So it takes about 2 weeks of somebody just really getting in there and practicing to move the avatars around. And I had Jeremy Bailenson tell me, this isn't going to scale until your grandma can go do it. And it was a good way to say, like, UX is important. And so what we're looking at, so that's today. Future, what we're looking at doing is having it recognize intent, having the AI be able to recognize tone of voice, facial expressions, head movement, and turn that into the data to drive the avatar, so that the human's body is the controller system. There's a few different data sources here that are really interesting that we'll be able to correlate. So you have data coming in from the learner, which is the typical
Okay, I'm going to have to cut you off at that point, Carrie. I'm sorry, we're out of our 25 minutes, but we can certainly bring this up in the discussion. The point is that if the person does all the verbals and the system can sense and do the nonverbals appropriately, that's scalable, and that's exciting. So our 25 minutes is up. I'm going to hand things over to Muli. We reset the clock, and we'll go on to the next segment of the panel.
All right. Well, that was fascinating.
Just join me in thanking Carrie, please.
Yeah, exactly. Let's thank both Chris and Carrie for a wonderful segment. And obviously, I have to thank Mike and Jim and Lara and Susan and Guhan, PON, Anna for facilitating for this conference. This was a great focus on skills teaching, on the interpersonal skills, and another tool for that. I loved your lead into pilot training and simulations, Chris. I don't know if you know that, but I have a lot of experience being in that kind of setting. And I think there are a lot of parallels that we can then riff and talk on. My goal is going to be to extend this conversation from the interpersonal skills to the team of teams and the organizational level. Focus on what happens before and after the training session. And we saw some of that in the demonstration here, and how to look at the barriers to adopting technology and to using technology and technology to help us, which are basically technology and culture. And I'm going to focus on practical tools, mobile apps that exist today and what they can do today and what they can help us move forward, and in light of especially the latest trends of moving online so often. So I'm going to share here one slide that I hope you can all see. And what I'm going to start focusing on just briefly is, you look at the upper left, we have the individual who's sort of negotiating on intuition. And the way we teach is through this loop process of briefing, planning, then negotiating what's going on during the negotiation, and a lot of it is through the debrief afterwards. And what we try to do is take this individual that came to us from a team or from an organization and have them change their habits. And the two challenges there are, how do we get this to go on after training? And how do you take this back into the organization? So when we have the individual go back to the organization, I remember myself going back after training, trying to change my organization with all this cool stuff. I was an aerospace senior executive doing a lot of deals. We had this big dispute with this other company, hundreds of millions of dollars. I am trying to create value, find out their interests, find channels and multiple back table maneuvers. I come back to my own management meeting. The CEO looks at me and says, "Whose side are you on? You go back, you tell them this, or I'm leaving, or we're suing them." And so how do we take that learning as an individual and as a team, and we expand it? So on the personal level, what we do is we repeat this loop of briefing, reflection, taking lessons learned, briefing, reflection, and that's where we get to this individual theory of practice, right? If after you've accumulated a lot of lessons learned, you can do that. And what I'd like to show is the apps that are sort of helping us these days do some of that. On the left is Mike's app that he was mentioning, where you get some best practices and you can have the person track their own lessons learned, sort of like a personal notebook, and some learning that happens between negotiation sessions, before or after. And this is sort of a personal notebook. Now, any of these apps has to be simple, easy to use, and time efficient. On the right is a startup I've been working with for several years, a fellow Air Force pilot who's taken the Air Force philosophy of debrief culture and is trying to, or is extending that successfully to organizational change by having that be very simple, easy to use and operate post-action lessons learned. So you enter this into the system and immediately goes to a shared cloud where the lessons can be shared across geographies, and we'll talk about that a little later. And so the questions are, what happened? Why did it happen? How can I improve? Or the way I reframe the questions when I'm teaching or when I taught using this platform in negotiation is, what worked well? What would you do differently? What's the main lesson learned? And put that back into the system. And so what we're trying to do with this kind of system is is to use it every time, right? So the idea here is not to have a big postmortem only after major failures, right? Not only after an airplane crashes do you have the big investigation, but you do this after every flight, every sortie, after every exercise. So the same thing is to get in the habit of the individual debriefing every interaction and putting it in the system. And this won't happen if it's not easy and simple. So you need to really just focus on doing the one small improvement area, but you do it repeatedly. You get sort of into this hygiene loop of continuous learning, continuous improvement. So you don't do it just after failures. You don't do it just after major clients. You do it after successes. You do it after every interaction, and you start sharing the interaction. Now, what's the barrier of taking that and extending it to the team level? Well, the barriers are culture. People don't like sharing their mistakes. And especially if there's a team leader who determines the person's incentives or hiring or firing or retribution, people are very reluctant. So the challenge is creating the culture, and this needs to come from the top with leadership by example, of rank doesn't matter, status doesn't matter, everybody reports back into the system and shows their results. And that is a requirement for that is creating a safe space for learning. Now, we're used to doing that with individuals who are from disparate backgrounds. Doing it from a team is if we get to train the whole team, we can start trying to change that culture. And it still comes back to what is the reporting. And Chris, you mentioned how do you measure success? Well, we do it by self-reporting. So it becomes very subjective. And I remember days where you could see one negotiator, one salesperson come out of a meeting and said, I did great, I got them to the minimum number, and a different salesperson say, oh, I did poorly, I could have gotten more. And actually, when you go back and look at the tape and you look at the scenario, just like the simulator that Carrie presented, you realize that the one who's very hard on themselves, they did a much better job. And what you're getting is just their story of what happened. So the key to making these debrief units very successful is actually having some quantitative measurements, having things you can look at. And this is hard to do in real life when you're negotiating with the counterpart, easier to do when you're negotiating in a simulation, or like you presented in a simulator with a simulator operator. Then you can start looking at some of the value creation variables. But what's the process that was used? Those things can be measured in quantitative form. So how do you behave? And with today's world, you get a lot of videos, you can actually see that. It changed in the piloting world, in the military world with pilots. Things really start changing in far as culture when you had videotape recorders in the cockpit. And you could actually see what happened. Before that, there were 3 pilots coming down saying they're the ones who shot the enemy aircraft down. And you didn't know which one gets to be the ace, the one that got the reward. But when you had the tapes, you could actually see who was on altitude, who was on where they were supposed to be, who actually got the reward for that shoot down, etc. So having that data, having it be put up, and having it shared are keys. So what this platform is trying to do when you get into a team culture, when you start reviewing the tapes and you start reviewing each other's tapes, you start to get what you're creating is the team standard practice, the team standard culture. And you're having this self-awareness of all your other teammates and how well they're doing. And I think this is in negotiation, this is really important because we can decide as a team to this particular customer to negotiate this particular issue. We're better off sending Susie than we are sending Jim, or vice versa. So the team starts to get this team self-awareness, and they start developing what we would call the team's theory of practice. They have standard practices for how they do things, and they have their team standard practice for how this looks. And if I'll go back to sharing my screen and just go through a few slides. So at the team, we wanted to get the debriefs, right? So this is the reflection piece. We want to be able to share that quickly between the team members with the monitoring of who's doing what and how are they following the use of the checklists or the standard practices that we determined. What we've seen lately, and this is in my course at MIT this semester, multi-party negotiations, we've had to go online, just like many of us had to. And with Zoom and Slack and shared documents, all of this is now becoming readily available to debrief in real time for the students. So I had them relook at the videos and relook at the Slack conversations that they were having sidebars and the different breakout rooms they were going to build coalitions, and looking at all of that to see what actually transpired. And today with a platform like iDecision Games, you get all of that also housed in one platform that gives them the roles, looks at the results, and everything happens on the same platform. Now, watching others, watching videos is the way we've been teaching many times in the asynchronous. So between sessions. And what, again, Zoom lets us do is, as opposed to some of the older videos where we can't see the breakout rooms, unless we have two cameras, as in World Trade Center with Larry that happened to have two, with Zoom, we have 4 breakout rooms and we get to have cameras in all of them. And we get to see the prep and we get to see the afterwards. So there's a ton of data, and you watching, like Larry mentioned yesterday, watching others negotiate, watching others debrief helps the team learning, helps the individual learning and the team learning. I sent you all a link in the material of the conference and a coupon for downloading this free Asynchronous app that you can play with. I used to say this is avatars. Chris, yesterday I learned that I should call these agents or proxies or something, because these are, there isn't a puppeteer in the background, but it does have the same kind of quality where we have a mentor briefing you through. You're seeing in the center, for example, an entrepreneur negotiate or a salesperson negotiate on the right. They're telling you what the situation is and they're asking, what would you do? And you're giving them the answer, and based on that answer, the scenario continues. And this is something, again, scenario-based learning is something that focuses not just on the micro skill, but on the decision-making process. And going back to the aerospace parallel, a lot of the accidents happen not because pilots can't fly the airplane correctly, they happened because pilots decided to continue to fly into bad weather when they shouldn't. It was in the decision-making process. So you're breaking up the learning into small scenarios and small segments, which I think, Mike, you alluded to with the power of this immersion tool, which is focused on a segment, on a small segment of negotiation to work on a particular skill, not necessarily the whole simulation exercise. And actually, when I talk to my business executive clients and friends now, I'm hearing that their experience of going to online, they're very happy with the fact that this has saved them time, right? They're very efficient on time. They don't have to travel as much, but they're also happy because they can do negotiation happens in shorter chunks. More meetings, but the meetings are shorter. Instead of scheduling a 3-hour negotiation, they're going through and doing this in 4 half-hour sessions. And I think this is also something that we have to really pay attention that the world of negotiation is going to, because this is something that we'll experience. So the improvement cycle is fairly simple. You collate all these lessons learned, and now you're creating the lesson learned database. And this is the learning happens in that phase between the lesson learned and preparing for the next negotiation, the next performance zone session. And you're planning some actions and you're briefing yourself before the next meeting. So if the system can brief you on the relevant lessons learned from the last sessions you had, then you become much better prepared for what is your objective in this next meeting. If it's a training session, then what is it you're trying to work on? I'm trying to work to be more assertive. If it's a real meeting, you're saying, well, I know this client tends to be very competitive. I'm going to work on not getting suckered into becoming competitive, but positioning is to joint problem solving. So what happens in the briefing before you go into the meeting with the app is very important. And the more we can improve there, the better the performance will be in the zone. So everything that's in the performance zone, be it a negotiation, a simulation practice, or a immersion session, or watching a video, happens in the performance zone. The learning that happens afterwards, the lesson learned, gets looped back into your preparation for the next session. And when we try to extend that to the organization is actually teams of teams, right? So if you look at the sales organization at the bottom left, they're all salespeople, but some of them handle different geographies, or they handle different channels, distribution channels, or one has aftermarket and one has major OEMs, or major clients have their own team. And what you want to do is you want to encourage each of these teams to develop their own team culture, their own best practice. And you want to be able to extend those best practices across different teams. So if we use, again, military piloting example, if you've got an Air Force squadron that's based on land flying to an area, and you also have a Navy squadron on an aircraft carrier flying to the same area, you want that lesson learned to come back to the system immediately when that one pilot lands, because it could save the lives of pilots in the other squadron halfway across the world. And the same thing here with the salespeople. You want to have the salespeople be incorporating lessons learned quickly across the organization. And this is especially important in today's world that's volatile and unexpected and changing very fast, because with different teams, you want to maintain their culture, but you want to be able to use their strengths. And you sort of do what we call A/B testing in technology, right? Different sales teams will try different strategies, but then you can say, all right, we found out this works better. Now everybody shift. This is the lesson learned. This is what we're doing. So this platform that each individual is using in different teams also extends across different teams, or in the organizational level, across different functions. So some lessons learned are across different places, and some are local to the team. I was training a group of 50 CEOs about deal making, acquisitions, etc. They're all in the same group of companies, but they come from their own company. So they have their local culture for their company, and their CFO is part of that culture, but their CFO is also part of the CFO group that is doing lessons learned that are unique to CFOs. And so you're tailoring which lessons learned get pushed to which user based on relevance and based on effectiveness. So where can AI take us even farther than this already exists and operating today? And by the way, when we run these projects, to your question on assessment, we then ask the teams to self-reflect and score themselves based on how better they're thinking their performance is after the team has turned the culture to more of a debrief culture, a learning culture. And we also ask them how they feel comfortable about the culture change. So you're trying to push both performance and culture, and technology can help you that. So making the ease of use and efficiency is key. You don't want this to be too cumbersome. The negotiator, the lawyer, the deal maker, the salesperson, the procurement person, they don't want to spend a lot of time entering data into another system. This doesn't replace the Salesforce.com or the Intralinks database that they have to put data into. This focuses on the process.
Muli, you've got about 5 minutes.
Yep. And so what we're trying to have the AI do is find the relevant briefing and pre-negotiation data for the briefing. so that when I go into negotiation, I get pushed the lessons learned that are relevant for me from my own experience previously, and from others that experienced the same setting of negotiation. Also, we're using the machine to tell us what to debrief after a negotiation based on areas of focus and interest, and assessing the quality of the lesson learned input after a negotiation. Be a little more specific, changing the language of that to make it better. That's the challenge in how to make this simple, easy to use. Again, if it's not simple and easy and fast, it doesn't have the same effect. Once you have that, you can personalize the debrief and coach the individual on their own strength, on their areas of improvement, by personalizing their off engagement, not in the performance zone, what lessons plans they should go to, what areas they should be focusing on as far as further training and instruction or coaching, and then collate sort of this multiple team learning to say, all right, I need these people in order to do a refresher training on bias or a refresher training on something else. And I think this is proving powerful, and you see that you get the hashtag, the common words of what it is you're trying to work on, and over time this becomes very, very effective. So the culture is needed to drive technology adoption. Some of this is enabled now because we're all negotiating online and working online. And then the AI can assist the technology to drive even further organizational culture by using such platforms. Thank you.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking Muli for his presentation. And Jeanne, over to you.
All right, thank you, Chris. In our next segment, we have two presentations. We have two AI-based platforms, one for interpersonal negotiation and improving individual skill set and outcomes in individual level. The other one is at the organizational level and improving the organization's outcomes in negotiation. Both of these are AI driven, they're both active. Emmanuel Johnson is going to talk about Iago, that's the first one. He's a computer science PhD student at the University of Chicago, and his mentor John Kratch mentioned that Emmanuel is going to talk this afternoon. And then Emmanuel, as soon as he's done, Kristjan, I want you to jump right in. So Kristjan is co-founder and chief technology officer of Pactum. And I'm going to let Kristjan tell you what Pactum does, because I think you'll be really surprised. So Emmanuel, over to you.
All right, and can everyone hear me well? Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen. So hello everyone, today I'm going to be talking about how we are using automated agents to teach negotiation. And so one of the things that the AI community has been concerned with over the last 2 decades is using methods from artificial intelligence to teach various skills. So there's been a lot of work in these systems that are, which I will call intelligent tutoring systems, where essentially you have an AI system that is able to monitor what students are doing and adapt the learning for various subject matter. And so these systems have been very good at teaching things like math, reading comprehension, and even computer literacy. However, there's very little work that has been done to look at how intelligent tutoring systems can be used to teach interpersonal skills. And I believe that's essentially for, there's 2 reasons why. One, unlike math and science, which tend to be very procedural, and if I teach you one algorithm, it tends to work across a variety of scenarios. In interpersonal skills, as I'm sure many would agree with, is it's a little bit nuanced. But what's interesting is that there's been quite a lot of work in economics as well as psychology around how one should approach and be able to do well in negotiation. And then the other thing is, oftentimes interpersonal skills require that you have a partner that you can practice with. And so these present an interesting challenge for automated systems. Now, one of the things that's been interesting is that over the years, we've seen a growing number of AI systems, both virtual humans and robots, that are advanced enough and allow us to customize their ability. And these systems could perhaps serve as a great way of teaching interpersonal skills. So when we look at a negotiation, we can divide a negotiation into three stages, or the teaching of a negotiation. You know, you begin by going over a set of principles, highlighting what good negotiators might do in different scenarios. Then you give your students a chance to practice with each other. After they practice, there's often a debriefing stage where you go over their sessions. And oftentimes the debriefing session is done in a classroom scenario, in a classroom setting where you essentially show how students did relative to the others. There's been growing interest in using automated systems in the stage of practicing your negotiation skills. So a number of researchers have built these automated agents that students can practice with, and have shown that just by practicing, they're able to improve. One of those systems is a system that we've been developing in our lab called Iago. So Iago was developed by another PhD student, Jonathan Mell. And what is unique about Iago is a fully automated system that is web-based, allows you to make offers, ask questions, as well as state your preference to the agent. And there's a log of that interaction. And what's also interesting is on the back end, we're able to build a variety of different agent types. So we're able to vary the offers the agent make, what it says, and essentially fine tune the behavior to whatever personality or whatever negotiation strategy we want to adopt in a scenario. But so what Iago allows you to do is you can make offers, you can ask questions, so on and so forth. Now, as I stated, a lot of the work in the automated systems community has focused primarily on designing agents that allow humans to practice negotiation skills, but not a lot of work has looked at the feedback component. And as we all would agree, that feedback is a huge component of the learning process, because it's a chance for the learner to get input on how well they did, as well as some practical things they can do in the next negotiation session to do better. And so in thinking about how to design this feedback, one of the things that we wanted to do was to first say, okay, well, what do good negotiators do? So we looked in the negotiation literature and found a number of principles that have been validated by a previous researcher. Now, most of these principles have been shown as predictors of good negotiation outcome, but these have primarily been in human-to-human negotiations. So it wasn't clear that when you transition to an automated system that these things still work. And so in our first set of work was to show that these principles of good negotiation can also be quantified and understood in the automated system. And so what we show is that a number of these principles are indeed correlated with negotiation outcomes. So one of the principles we look at is work has shown that it is best to make high initial offers, and those who make high initial offers tend to get more. And so we show that in our data set, participants who did make high initial offers did claim more. Also understanding your opponent matters. And so metrics such as unasked questions looks at how much did you gather about your opponent before you made an offer, and how does that affect your overall outcome. And so from these metrics, we then look to develop a automated feedback system. And when thinking about the feedback, we divided our feedback in essentially two categories: value creation and value claiming. So value claiming feedback looked at how well you were able to gain, how much you're able to gain in the negotiation, what percentage of the pie were you able to gain. And then the other piece is value creation. How well are you able to understand your opponent to find a win-win solution? And now, are you all able to see this video?
Oh, you need to exit the presentation mode.
All right, can you see my screen?
It's still the same screen as the demo.
So yeah, I'll go demo.
Okay.
Take it out of presentation mode.
Yeah, it should be out of presentation mode.
And some of us will be able to linger, and we could see the video after the formal 3 p.m. close. I was just typing that on the chat.
Yeah, you might want to just describe what's going on, and then you can put links to the video after.
Okay, so yeah, I'll do that. So one of the first set of points, or one of the first points we provide feedback on is the initial offer. So looking at what percentage of the potential pie that you could have received, the feedback tells you, you've received, your first offer has gotten X percentage of the overall pie, and whether or not that was a good thing or a bad thing, and then what you could do next time to claim more of the pie. The other thing that we provide feedback on is how many offers and how many questions you ask, as well as how much of your preferences you communicated. And so the idea here is that you want to, in a negotiation, you want to share information about yourself, but you also want to be careful because your opponent can use that information to exploit you. And so we have a way of quantifying how much information you're sharing with an opponent. And then the last piece we're able to provide feedback on is your overall deal. So using this notion of Pareto optimality and using the Pareto frontier, we can show how well you did in a negotiation, given the set of preferences that you have as well as what your opponent have. And so through a series of studies, we've shown that one, those who practice with an automated agent can indeed improve the negotiation skills over the course of multiple negotiations, but also that feedback matters. And those who do receive feedback tend to claim more value overall. And so what this helps to show is that, yes, indeed, not only are the feedback that we are giving relevant, but it's actually helping negotiators improve their skills over time. And that's it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Emmanuel. Kristjan, you're up. So Kristjan has a PhD in AI and mathematics from, I wrote it down. The
University of Manchester.
Right. Welcome, Kristjan. From, I must tell you, he's in the middle of his night. He's reaching us from Estonia. So we really appreciate your coming, Kristjan.
Thank you, thank you. Very happy for the invitation. I'll give a quick summary of a company called Pactum. We are automating commercial negotiation with AI. The problem statement, can you see the slide? Just checking. Good. So big enterprises have a lot of partners. They might be vendors for retailers. They might be hotels for booking.com. In vendors, for retailers, they are vendors, and they have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of partners there. And the Pareto principle is there. So 80% of the revenue is moving via 20% of the vendors, and 80% of the vendors take 20% of the revenue. And this gives this skewed incentive for people to focus on strategic and important deals, and they don't have time, effort, willpower, or it's just too costly or too difficult to manage the long tail vendors. And due to this, there is a huge tail spent there, huge money and wealth left on the table from both sides, because there is no possibility to pick up the phone and make these deals. We are solving this problem of long tail vendors. How do we do it? First, we go in to an enterprise and we are defining a value function. So we need to know what are the tradable items and how valuable these things are. As it is a bit maybe technical conference as well, I can say that the end result of it is like something like 100 lines of code, basically writing down the interactions and values of different terms, such as payment terms, net 15 versus net 30, exclusivity, insurance, transportation, and of course all the prices. So we need to know what is good for our client in order for our system to achieve a really good deal for them. Next, we are designing from modules, we are building up a structured autonomous negotiation. It is a chat-like interface, which is sent to a partner and they can do this negotiation there. And obviously for you, it is a trivial knowledge that in order to reach to a Pareto optimal deal, in order to reach the best deal for yourself, you need to kind of understand the other part as well. You need to ask things. And that's why this conversation is needed there. But it's not possible. It's difficult to do the mediation things because there is a trust issue. Big enterprises don't want to give their information out somewhere else. So it seems that the negotiation is the only option or only way to do it. And automatic negotiation is for long tail. What else we do? We are also automatically generating this contract. This thing can be signed with DocuSign, for example, and this information is updated in all the relevant systems in our client. And this general, what is happening here, that basically everything is automatic. I'm gonna now show you a demo. It is based on our one of our clients. We cannot mention all of them, but one of our clients is actually Walmart, the world's largest company, and they have like more than 2 million employees there, and managing this thing is complex, and they are very happy to automate part of it from there. And it is like very, very loosely connected to this story, although we cannot show the precise negotiations that happened to them. The UX is as follows. Client's supplier gets an email explaining the situation, and there is a link to a negotiation. This negotiation can be opened from any machine. You can leave from the negotiation and come back. It stops where you can continue where you left off. First, it asks, how are you? It says that hello and welcome to a global retailer vendor communication system. So I am playing now a small vendor, a long tail vendor who usually no one talks to them. I'm skipping all the legal aspects and how the stuff works and confidentialities and so on in order to save time. But even although I'm skipping it, then actually we are asking we are asking all these questions and people are giving yes to us. And it's this commitment and consistency theory that if you're giving yes to many times, then you're kind of getting more eased, and it's more likely that you might be ending up with a good deal. We use basically every sentence here is somehow proven based on the very valuable work of the academia over the years. For example, we are saying that we have a limited amount of stores we can allocate to selected vendors. So we are trying to say that it's not us who is evil, but it's just a limited resource. And actually, this was already explained in the email as well, that we are offering extra stores to this vendor, or we might be offering extra stores. So we are saying some positive things about the vendor, or some negative things, or these sentences are specific to a particular vendor. We are getting them from the central data system. So every number here is different, and every sentence to the different vendors is different. And also the full strategy and aggressiveness and everything is different as well, depending on the vendor. Anyway, I'm going to continue. I understand the situation. Something is good, something is bad. We are saying that we would like to increase the number store count with them. That would how it would look like. And then we are playing on the loss aversion here, that we are not saying how much they will win, but how much they would lose if they don't take this deal. And maybe for clarification, the PATNA in this situation is the old contract. So if we don't reach a deal, then nothing changes. Then they don't get extra 25% of the stores, and no other deal is kind of broken. The previous deal will hold. So only things can improve. Anyway, would you like to explore ways of improving the business with us? Of course I do. And now we are reaching to this real negotiation aspect of this Harvard negotiation, where you're reaching towards the Pareto optimality. We are asking the preferences, what they would like. Let's say that I would like to give annual rebate payments, not every month, it's some retail term. Then we are anchoring high 8.7% of reduction in order to give these stores and annual rebates. But this number, again, it's dependent on the vendor, how dependent they are on this big retailer, how much we need them, how replaceable they are, what are the revenues, what are the profit margins. All this data is available usually in these enterprise systems because they need it for human negotiators. We are just tapping on the same data source. Of course, I'm not able to reduce it, so it's asked me what I might be able to do. Let's say I'm going to say 4% here, and so on. No, I cannot meet this. So the conversation can now go on. Computer has infinite amount of time in order to reach agreement, to Pareto optimality, to reach something that is better. So we can try out different ways and we can see whether this thing reaches to a conclusion. So I'm going to check how much time do you have. Maybe I should continue. Okay, so I hope you understood how it works. So how we have been doing so far? So far we have been able to improve profits or revenues to our clients, like depending on the client, 11% to 27%. So our clients are getting better deal, and it's quite amazing in a sense that you might come to work. You see that in last week we sent off 4,000 negotiations, 3,000 new deals were made, and you earned 50 million without doing absolutely anything, because we are just updating deals that no one has been touching. It's even not difficult to be better. We even don't need to be better than humans because we need to be better than no one, and that's why it's possible. But what's even more exciting is that so far for our clients, partners, these vendors, or we have an ad publishing network there as one of our clients and so on. So far, our vendors also have preferred Pactum over human, 74% to 82% depending on the client. And like, that's quite amazing. We were thrilled about this. We didn't believe that it's going to happen. One reason is that this usually with our clients, the PATNA is that everything will be left the same. So you're kind of only getting better deals or you don't get anything. In that sense, it's good for them. And they also liked it because it's well structured, it's clear, clean. This thing talks to you, asks your preferences. No one has ever talked to me. Like, they like it. They like it in very many different ways. And now coming to academia and teaching. So how can we do it? How can we be so good adding value to our clients fully automatically and being good for our clients' partners or vendors? One reason is that everything is structured chat, how you saw from my demo. I only answered numbers and multiple choices. This means that we can do improvements. We can A/B test strategies, tactics, wordings, different value functions, and so on. This is one of our clients, and we show here, all this data is real, like from different iterations that we are sending out batch of negotiations, and then second batch and third batch. And the first question is number of publishers who prefer negotiating automatically and percentage of value increase per tier on average to our client. So we can increase both of these things at the same time, which feels amazing because it's exactly this opposite to zero-sum thinking, that we can make it better for both of the parties. And the reason is that we are A/B testing. We can do it based on data. We have real business deals, sometimes worth a lot, and so people are committed to it, but it is structured. And this is exciting, as we can, in academia, there is also this tiny problem that for most theories, there is a counter theory, and most theories there are kind of something that it's sometimes difficult to decide which of the theory is more applicable here. But for us, it is just an A/B test, and we can figure it out. And another aspect, what I like about it, is that I've been teaching in the university myself, and I do love it. I'm very eager. We haven't been doing it, of course, but I'm looking for opportunities to use Pactum also as a teaching tool. An easy way would be that the students are negotiating against this bot to train themselves. But even more exciting would be if they would be building new systems so that others can negotiate against their AI. That's it. That's the team. We have 3 co-founders. Kasper is my brother. Some of you might know it because he was the founder of eResidency. Our CEO, Martin Rand, he used to work in Skype and sold his previous company, Vitalfields, to Monsanto. And he used to work as a commercial lead for Europe in Climate Corporation that was part of Monsanto. And he was doing negotiating every day. And from there, that was where the idea came from. And in my PhD, I was playing with deep reinforcement learning agents who were collaborating and cooperating. And I've also been responsible for building self-driving delivery robots, or leading 4 teams to make them 100 times more safe. And now they are roaming around the world. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. And Mike, we're going to jump over into general Q&A, and I hope that you'll identify some themes. You're muted?
Yes, I was, now I've cured that. So I want to be fair to people. I've posted some things. I hope I'm, yes, okay, so we've got a number of things. So we've looked at the puppeteers. We haven't had a full look at Emmanuel's technology, but he's now given us in the chat the URL, and it may be the same thing that Jeanne did, so that we could see the Iago stuff. I'm curious about, if I can turn to Kristjan for a question myself, when you're reaching into this long tail of vendors that you just don't have time to connect with, but now it's automated, you can do it quickly. Are you running simultaneous negotiations? Is this becoming an auction of some kind?
Yes, good question. It is a possibility, and we can do it. It's not difficult for us, but to be honest, at the moment, we haven't been doing it. But so far, we have done it such that when the negotiation ends, this will change the parameters of the next negotiations with different vendors. So quite often the reason is that some resources are limited. For example, the number of stores. So if you have been heavily giving away stores to get some price back, then now you would like to get more price for the same stores because you are kind of running out of some limited resource. It might be marketing, it might be face-to-face meetings, it might be anything. So we are doing dynamic pricing, and the previous negotiations affect the value function and the trade-offs and aggressiveness of the next negotiations. So in a way, but not fully parallel yet, but it's easy to do.
And there are a lot of strategic questions. Are there other hands up here for comments and questions? I've got a ton of them, but this shouldn't be my show. Just raise your hand if you'd like to be called on. Ron, good to see you.
Hello, Mike. I'm really intrigued by this question of how technology facilitates the feedback stage of learning. So this is really a question, I think, Mike, to you and Muli, to you, around either through your apps or others, is there a way to capture others' perspective on your negotiating moves? So to get sort of the feedback a la, Keith Allred's 360 tool. And secondly, kind of, can we move beyond pure individual performance, evaluating pure individual moves, to kind of group dynamics and outcomes? So is there a way we can give feedback to people who are, in a sense, sort of enabling or setting up other people's moves, and we can look at it more systemically rather than individually?
Let me briefly deal with your first question about individual feedback and then pass it to Muli. I created a platform that's available through Harvard Business School Publishing, where if you're teaching negotiation, you can assign whatever simulations you want. They get populated in this. And every time your students go to negotiate, they have to submit what their negotiation plan is. And afterwards, they do an after-action review. Do that in a repeated sequence of negotiations. That gets compiled into a workbook. So it's almost like getting a complete physical or something from head to toe, because it includes also peer feedback, the students with whom you've negotiated. And they're instructed to give very specific, actionable feedback in that regard. When I teach the course, I have that in the background. And my final exam actually calls on people to review their workbook, because I want the exam to be a learning experience in its own right. Now, in my personal device app, getting peer feedback is not usual. You walk out of the car dealership and ask the salesperson as you go, how did I do? Well, you robbed me blind, right? So I think we can do that in the student context. The only way I can see doing it in the real world is that if you're negotiating with a team and a teammate is by your side, or perhaps because of the technology we've got now a record thanks to Zoom, and your mentor or a colleague, somebody you choose as a coach, could do that for you. So it's hard, obviously, in the real world, I think, to get feedback from your counterpart, but I think there are substitutes that are pretty good. Muli, can I ask you to take the organizational learning part of that, and Jeanne wants to get in too.
Yeah, I want to get in here too. Ron, we also have a feedback system for in the classroom, so through negotiation and team resources. And one of the things that's really important is training people to give feedback that is developmental, and they learn how to negotiate themselves by giving the feedback. Giving the feedback is almost more important than reading your own feedback. Now, some people get some pretty startling information on their own feedback, but because it's you're trying to get them to give developmental feedback, they're learning a lot about negotiation themselves. It's just like, how much better a negotiator are we all after we had to teach negotiation the first time than we were before.
I gave you 2 thumbs up on that, Jeanne. I am fully on the same page with you about the value of giving feedback. So I tell my students to get a coach and be a coach.
Yeah. So I'll just chime in on that. In leadership development, there's sort of practice, reflect, then assess and provide feedback are the 2 layers above that. And so you're absolutely right. In learning to be a better practitioner, by teaching others, you become a better practitioner. So giving the feedback is the skill that you sort of go to the next level. So Jeanne and Mike, that works really well. To the question on the system, Ron, yes, so when you provide your own feedback to yourself, your own lesson learned, or if someone provides you their feedback as lesson learned, as your instructor or your colleague, as Mike said, if you're negotiating in a team, or the counterpart if it's an exercise, the rest of the group can chime in and give feedback on that lesson learned. So you're having like a Slack discussion about that lesson learned, and the whole team is tweaking that lesson learned. So someone could say, Well, not in every case. You have to remember, in these cases, that's not what you want to do. And you start having that discussion. So it's a very powerful tool to actually talk about the feedback and learn from that. The question about a team is the same way. Yes, if you're going to negotiate as a team, then you have your own team lesson learned, and that talks about, we didn't assign roles appropriately. It wasn't clear who was the one that was supposed to, move this agenda item forward or talk that expertise. And that's a team lesson learned, not an individual skill, but a team skill goes into the same kind of bucket. And I just want to chime in on an earlier question that was asked about the team size. It really depends on context, but the number of debrief actions that you want to have is several per day, no more than too many per day. So if you get to 10 negotiations per day per individual, it starts being too much. But if you're at 3 or 4, then perfect. Now you're really going to get the dynamic in a full-time employment setting, not in a classroom setting, as really driving that culture. Yeah, great questions.
So may I add something that about a theme that was really kind of going through all these talks and that I thought would come out a little bit more than it did. So Kristjan really addressed why he thought the customers really liked his system. In the first place, nobody talked to them before, and now they are negotiating with an agent, but this agent is very polite. We see with the avatar system that Mike himself figured out very quickly and got into it and liked doing it. And I'm quite sure, Emmanuel, that the Iago system, that you have quite a bit of data on satisfaction of participants negotiating with Iago as the agent. And I wonder if maybe you, Chris, maybe you, Emmanuel, can add a little bit more for us to understand. I think a lot of us who haven't had our students negotiating with agents are a little leery of that. And why is it that agents work so well and people like them?
Well, I'll tackle that, and we're contrasting agents and avatars. So this is like working with an intelligent tutoring system versus working with a human tutor. Some people like the intelligent tutoring system better because it's endlessly patient. You're not sitting there thinking that it thinks you're stupid, because it doesn't think anything about you one way or another, and so on. Other people really prefer the human tutor because the human tutor is more capable of giving emotional feedback. They might feel that the tutor can recognize a wider range of problems, which I think is true at this point in history, and so on. So it's again sort of dependent on the context. If you want a lot of individual practice, it's great to have an intelligent system that you can just practice and practice and practice. But if you want something that's going to be more authentic, which means less mistraining, higher transfer capability, then avatars are probably better.
I can jump in to your question, Jeanne, from kind of broader perspective, because we've looked at a range of different systems, from very realistic things like immersion to more stylized. What we find in general is that there's a kind of a psychological distance that gets created when people interact with an avatar or an agent rather than a person. And I think that distance has potential benefits, but also potential problems that it introduces. I mean, I think it makes the interaction less risky. You feel less threatened, less evaluated. And so that in some ways allows you to have less cognitive load, focus more on what you're trying to do rather than, am I being judged? It makes people, we have some data suggests that they're more comfortable engaging in risky negotiation tactics than they might do with another person that's their friend in the classroom or someone that they know, because there's less socio-evaluative threat. But on the flip side, dealing with socio-evaluative threat is part of what you learn in dealing in negotiations. And so I think these kind of technologies may be better at helping you work through the more cognitive aspects, but may be not as well suited to, say, learning emotion regulation in the moment when you're dealing with a conflict situation.
I assume there's great research potential in some of the things we've seen here. To look at the patterns of offers and counteroffers in Pactum, to look at the kind of data that's collected in Iago and so forth. So some of our friends who are in the adjoining room might be very fascinated to see what could be mined here. But right now, I'd like to thank Chris, Muli, Jeanne, Emmanuel, and Kristjan for their presentations. And without taking a breath, we can continue. I know some of you may have to depart, but please join me in thanking everybody who presented.
Yeah.
So it's perfectly permissible to sign off and, depending what time zone you're in, take some nourishment or whatever the case may be. Kim, you have your hand up, Kim Leary? Or is that a goodbye? Melissa, is that a hand up or is that applause?
I think Larry Susskind has a question. I don't know if you're still on, Larry. I think it's for Kristjan. How do you set an organizational baseline of negotiating capacity so you can track improvement over time? What would you measure and how? Or maybe that's a question for Muli. Maybe for both of them.
I think it's for Muli, but I can answer my answer as well, but Muli, go first.
Yeah, I think Larry is gone, but so the thing is implementing this, because it's not only a technology play, there is a huge cultural barrier in shifting the organization to allow this transparency and allow this culture shift to the debriefing culture, the learning organization culture. The baseline is usually, as I said, both about performance and culture, and is usually through assessment, a survey assessment, that you ask the people what their perception is. There are certain metrics where you can actually look at numbers, but as many of you who know, who've worked as consultants with procurement or with sales, what environment are you in? You can't say I want to save 2% when the prices are going down 10% market-wide. So it becomes a business challenge setting the benchmark. From the behavioral aspect, we do see that we run the survey beforehand and afterwards, and we see a satisfaction with the team, both in their performance as individuals, performance as a team, and the culture around learning.
Kristjan?
Yes, it is a very good question. A simple answer is that we need to define the value function, because our mathematical AI is useless in everyday common sense. For it, it's just an abstract mathematical space, and we need to be very, very precise and exact what we need to achieve. And this takes actually multiple days and multiple meetings even to set it up for like 4 tradable items, because they're also dependent on the different properties of the vendor. But after that, it becomes like this thing writes down what we want to achieve. And these things might not be exactly related to prices for one pizza, but they might be related to profitability for real estate per meter of store. And then you can kind of look at it. And as we know, the cost of transportation and insurance and cost of capital and so on, then we can evaluate the full contract space. What are the different options and what is the full value of all the contracts. And we are benchmarking against this, that our client themselves told us that this we want to achieve. And then we say that in last 4 months, we achieved so much value for you based on your estimate what is good for you.
Can I speak to that specifically? And maybe Jonathan will want to jump in, and then we'll get Emmanuel perhaps. Like others on this, I've been at teaching negotiation for a long time. And one thing that's limited about the simulations that we use, we typically award points for how much of a particular issue you get. We've taken an important part of negotiation preparation out of the equation, and that's how do you compare not apples and oranges, but apples and hubcaps, right? And in my online course, we have a crude kind of conjoint analysis where the students, before they negotiate, look at different packages and they might be linked. So I'd love to teach in San Francisco, but you're gonna have to pay me more because it's very expensive to live there. So those are connected and not necessarily in a linear way. How does Pactum deal with the fact that you do have multi-issues, time of delivery, as well as price and other kinds of things? Is there some kind of function that is doing something more crudely, more than the crude systems that we use implicitly when we come up with simulations?
Good question, thank you. Sometimes these answers are quite weird by our client. For example, a buyer in the retail company might say that he doesn't know how much is vendors want to meet the buyer because buyer has all the information about the future. They can sell their new products. They have a lot of information. So they want to have a one-to-one meeting. But if we ask them, like, how much is this one-to-one meeting like valued, or if we are giving it away, how much do we need to get back at least? They say, I don't know. I don't care. Like,
Yep.
I can do 3 a month. You get me as much value as possible out of all the hundreds of vendors. And quite often these things come out dynamically. The same is with the cost of real estate. Like you have limited number of stores, you're not going to build new ones, so many new ones, so you are getting as much out as possible. With some things it's more clear. For example, cost of capital, that you know quite precisely, like 0.16% for 10 days. Sometimes that you have estimates for like insurance and for packaging and for kind of logistics and so on. So they write all these things down. And sometimes they're dependent on the partner as well. And that's most exciting for us, because then you cannot send out mass emails. And then it's so difficult for a human negotiator, because every time they need to prepare a lot, because the value function for their client changes as well. Like what you value in this deal. And every time they need to prepare. But for us, it's only preparing once, and then the agent can kind of be perfect in every negotiation and have the standardized quality to achieve it.
Even doing this in a qualitative way, I tell my students, don't give me your stretch goal. We want to hear that at some point. But what could you live with? What is a deal that you would take, in terms of how much of A, B, and C you need to get? Now, if we were to trim down B a little bit, how much more of C would you need to get? How much more of A would you give away? I'm not asking them to do the math on that, but I think it's a good mental exercise to think about trade-offs and priorities, thresholds, where things become non-negotiable. I'm looking to Emmanuel. I know that Jonathan was nodding his head on the conjoint analysis part, but Emmanuel, do you have a short video you can show us so we can see what you're doing with Iago?
Could I have a really quick comment? I think that in the enterprises, the negotiation skill is quite good, but the alignment of value function is a lot worse. So
Yes.
if you have a one not motivated negotiator who and it's a small deal, he doesn't have time to prepare all the aspects to understand even what is the good deal you achieve, and then they just achieve something. And we are asking precise questions from them, and they are giving some order of magnitude different answers, like how important it is to give out exclusivity to this one. Exclusivity, and they give out like order of magnitude different understandings how valuable it is to give it out. And
that's an organizational problem, Kristjan, because whomever they're reporting to has not been clear about what priorities are. And when I deal with companies, how do you identify your best negotiators? And since they don't have criteria, it's not very easy. And Emmanuel, where do we stand on, would it make sense for us, how long is the video and what can we see?
So the video is like, the first video is 51 seconds.
We got 51 seconds.
Okay.
Can you show it to us?
Yeah, 1 second. All right. Can you see my screen?
We can see Brad Smith here. YouTube.
Okay, can you still see it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. So this is essentially how a demo of Iago. So you're able to ask questions to the agent about its preferences. So in this case, you have 4 issues and about 10 or so levels. You can also tell the agent what you prefer, as well as make offers and reject the agent's offers. And so the agent has a bad net as well as some aspiration. And so it uses that in evaluating our offers. And as you can see, the agent adapts his offer based off of what information we've shared, as well as the offers we made. So 1 second. And then let me try to pull up the other video. So from that gameplay, let's see, right, we can also provide feedback. So based on how well your initial offer is, we try to use this idea of the pie, right? So we show you a physical pie. We say, based off of how much you claim the initial offer, you got 65% of the pie. That's really good. You said you're not seeing it?
Yeah, the videos are not playing for some reason.
Well, you're leading us through some slides, it looks like.
Okay. Can you see the video now?
And we're looking at a pie that says 65-35.
Okay.
Yeah, something's wrong with the playback. I mean, the difference with the immersion stuff, the immersion is, so this, we look at richer interactions, but we've been finding there's a lot of value just having these very simple stylized games where the interactions are more menu-based. These are probably more appropriate for like introductory simulations where you're learning about anchoring or you're learning about the idea of integrative potential. And so what the system can do is, give a person a multi-issue bargaining task with integrative potential. You allow people to exchange offers, exchange preferences, and you look at the efficiency of their agreement, and then you can try to go back and look at the trace and diagnose, why did they fail to reach an efficient agreement? Was it that they didn't ask any questions, they just made it offers? Okay, that's a problem, obviously. Or is it actually they did ask questions, and the information was truthful and available, and they should have been able to infer the efficient frontier, but they still made an inefficient agreement. Now we know it's more about their failure to integrate information, and then we can give basically very specific feedback to that student based on what was the error that they exhibited in that negotiation. But it doesn't address the issue that you were raising with in these simulations, kind of what you would give in an introductory negotiation. So you give the people the payoff table. They don't know their opponents, obviously, but the utility function is determined. Other work is looked at, so there's like a group at Delft that does a lot of work, what they call the pocket negotiator, which is a tool to try to actually kind of does conjoint analysis, helps you before you get into a negotiation, reason through what you actually care about, and also try to reason through what you think your other party might care about, so you can do some preparatory work up ahead. And then as you're doing the negotiation, they actually try to put that what you think the zone of agreement is up on the screen. And if the opponent is making offers which are inconsistent with your initial beliefs, highlight that as a potential thing that you want to reconsider.
Can you repeat the name? Is it Pocket Negotiator?
Yeah, it's a group, it's an AI group, Catalan Jonker. I'll put something up on the chat to point you to that. But yeah, Pocket Negotiator is a system.
One thing that's tricky, John, and I'm sure you appreciate it, is negotiation as a learning experience. And I may discover that there's something I thought I really needed, and on reflection, I don't, or I downgrade it, as the case may be. So I'm a little leery of systems where you lock into a particular priority and you're not prodded to rethink about what you give up in return for something else.
Yeah, and Iago doesn't make that distinction sort of between interests and values. And so in that sense, I think it's really appropriate for these kind of core concepts. But then you know, we need to make enhancements to deal with the distinction you're pointing out. Absolutely.
And just so everybody understands, John works with Emmanuel. Emmanuel is doing his doctoral work under you. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
And we're, yeah, you're at USC, not Chicago.
But there's a C in it, so.
May I ask John, I think, to reflect on what we heard yesterday late afternoon, not his part, but the other part, and what we're hearing about with the avatars today. And it seems, I think I'm hearing a difference between learning systems that are focused on strategy, so creating and claiming value, which clearly Iago is doing, clearly Pactum is doing, and systems that are more focused on verbal, nonverbal, interactive patterns. Are we talking about two different areas of work here?
Yeah, there are
Or
two
are they
different areas of
together?
work. There are potential for them to interact, but a lot of the stuff that like Sandy and Asan were talking about and the talk last night, it's more inferring things without getting into the semantics. So this person's hogging the turn, or this person sounds confident. And that, I would say, you know, you can often give feedback without really understanding what the person is saying. And so like one system we work on, public speaking. And so I can create an audience of avatars that nod at the right point, but then they start falling off nodding off if you don't have a lot of energy in your voice. And you can use that to treat the kind of linguistic, paralinguistic aspects or gaze, who you're looking at. The state of the art of these dialogue systems is such that they're pretty good now about transcription. They're very brittle in terms of understanding the meaning of what you're trying to say, unless it's within a very sort of micro domain. And so the stuff we do with the more immersion-like avatar I showed, we have a lot of data on a very specific task, and we can't translate that over to a different task. You know, we can handle 3 issues, 3 levels, or something like that. And so as dialogue systems get better, and I think chat systems are actually initially going to be more important than spoken dialogue systems. So having a chat interaction, there's less noise in the signal, so you can infer more meaning. But you really need to get the meaning if you want to give the more strategic advice. And so as these systems increase in their lexical understanding, then you'll see a merging of those two worlds.
Thank you.
Jeanne, can I come back to you on that? You can live a long and fulfilling life without subscribing to my Negotiation 360 app. I assure you of that. But it has a feature that sort of speaks to your 2 different topics comment that you led with your question to Jonathan. There is at the beginning a self-assessment phase in it, where you do a very simple quiz. You allocate 16 points total, no more, no less, across 4 negotiation skills: creating value, claiming value, asserting yourself, and empathy, which is very familiar. What I've done, which I think is different, is align them on 2 axes, horizontal and vertical. And doing some very complicated, beyond my skill, statistical analysis, you can see there are different clusters of people. There are people who see themselves as empathetic and as value creators more than they are value claimers or asserters. Plenty of exceptions and so forth, and it's fraught with all the problems you have with any self-assessment. But it comes a structure by which they can evaluate themselves going forward and coming back to it. And obviously, we'd like to be stretched in all of those directions. We'd like to grow better, and we hope as teachers we do that. We also want to be adaptable depending on the situation. So I think there's a play where the relationship dimension, which is horizontal in my diagram, and the problem-solving one, which is the vertical, becomes a meta way of thinking how these pieces fit together. And I can imagine that at some point, you know, somebody with more brains and more energy than I've got could imagine populating the data there someplace on that north, south, east, west diagram and updating it depending on what it learns from people's performance on Pactum or an Iago, whatever the case may be. But somebody else will have to do that.
Thank you.
Can I just comment on one thing, Jonathan? I think the power, and this is to Chris maybe and Carrie as well, the power that I see in the avatar with the puppeteer is twofold. One is when you're creating, thinking organizationally, trying to create a culture, we all get the same story of how we deal with Dr. No or with the certain character type. It now becomes part of the company folklore that this avatar represents this meta archetype of a kind of customer. So it becomes, and we do this in working in companies, in when we do their own case studies from a negotiation that happened years ago, they all remember, and Harvard, you know, Chainsaw Al becomes this thing. You could do that with avatar. Then the interesting thing with an avatar is you could have that avatar show up and people are now expecting a certain behavior with a certain operator, puppeteer, but now you have a different puppeteer and they do something a little different. And now you're training them to adapt in the negotiation. And again, I see a lot of similarities here between the simulator operator that, like Chris said, you can manage a few airplanes in the dogfight. You can't manage 10, but you can manage 3 enemy airplanes in a dogfight in a simulator. If you're a simulator operator, that's not even a pilot. They were trained at that. But the lesson learned and the feedback that comes back from the simulator operator is really valuable for the pilots. And they prefer it coming from someone who's not necessarily a competitor. And I've seen this on the app, the feedback that we got, that the fact that there's a mentor avatar they're shocked by the empathy. Everybody's saying, I really like how empathetic this avatar is, which was something that to me was a very big surprise because I thought people won't feel the same connection.